Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Audit and Governance meeting on Thursday, the 30th of November 2023. Welcome to people watching online. My name is Councillor Marcus Andrews. I'm the Chairman of ANG and will be conducting the meeting this evening. First of all, we need to deal with housekeeping rules, so I'll pass over to Mr. Hanton for that, please.
Good evening. Please note that this meeting of the Audit and Governance Committee is being recorded by the Council and will be published on the Council website for a minimum of 6 months. Anyone who is on the call but not in the room and wishing to speak, please use the raise your hand feature and switch on your video when invited to speak. Please could members in the room only speak when invited to by the Chair and mute their microphones when not speaking. And finally, Chairman, could everyone in the room ensure that background noise is kept to a minimum and that mobile phones and other devices are turned off or switched to silent for the duration of the meeting. Thank you.
And item 1 on the agenda is apologies. Do we have any apologies from councillors, Mr. Hanton?
Yes, Chairman. Apologies from Councillor John Beasley. I think everybody else is present. Councillor Connolly, the Vice Chair, is present virtually, and on that basis, obviously not entitled to vote if we should have a vote, but obviously participating in the discussion. And then moving on to item 2, which is substitutes. Chairman, to say that Councillor Karen Rampton has been formally appointed as substitute for Councillor Beasley.
Thank you for that. Welcome, Councillor Rampton, to the meeting. Item 3, declarations of interests. Have any interests been reported to you, or does anybody want to mention any now? I don't think we have any indications there, so there's no declarations of interest. Moving swiftly on, the next item on the agenda is the confirmation of the minutes, basically to confirm and sign as a correct record the minutes of the meeting held on the 26th of October. Sorry, Councillor Phipps.
Yeah, just wanted to bring up it's page 17. It's the last paragraph. It basically says that the level of redaction within the report, the necessary for confidentiality, restricting the ability of members to understand the report. I'm not aware that anybody actually said that it was necessary for confidentiality. Members didn't actually express that view. In fact, I think that people were basically saying, well, they weren't too sure that it was necessary. So I'm not sure that that was actually said. And it looks as though that it's being ascribed to the whole committee, as if the committee actually agreed that. And I don't know if they did. And then also in the same paragraph, it said, there was a contrary view from other members of the committee that sufficient time had been allowed to study the Bayside report, but actually there was only one member that expressed that view. It was actually Councillor Beasley. So it wasn't members, it was a member. I just wanted to make those points. That was all. Thank you.
Could you just, to help us, refer to the particular paragraph number? Or
it's page 17, the bottom paragraph, the final paragraph on that page.
Paragraph 37.
Sorry?
Paragraph 37.
Paragraph 37, sorry. I was just...
Okay, you suggesting an alternative wording then?
Chairman,
well, yeah, I
think
think
it helps.
it's just a bit misleading, the first bit, that the committee expressed the view. Well, I don't think the whole committee did actually express the view. That it was necessary for confidentiality.
Mr. Hanson's got a suggestion to overcome your concerns.
Thank you.
Chairman, I can certainly record in the minute now that those changes can be made, and it's probably more members of the committee noted that the level of redaction rather than express the view. That's fine. I can make that.
It was noted that it was said by the auditing officer, because that was where it came from, I believe, at the time.
I understand that. I can reflect that, Chair, and also the point about the one member, I can change that as well.
Yes, if you could do that, and then
Thank you.
make those amendments on that hard copy, and I can sign it later.
If you're happy to sign this, Chairman, subject to those, and I'll record in the minutes of this meeting that you're signing it subject to those amendments.
Yep. Okay, I'll do that now. Thank you for that.
I presume other members were happy with that.
Well, we need to actually formally accept, so if you will now propose the acceptance of the minutes with those amendments, and if we
I would be happy to do that.
Get a second just for the record. So Councillor Chapman-Law is willing to second that.
Everybody happy?
So don't need to take a vote. We'll just accept it on that basis. Thank you very much. Thank you for that. Number 5, public issues. To receive any public questions, statements or petitions submitted in accordance with the Constitution. I believe we do have 2 or 3 public questions, Ms. Harrington.
Yes, Chairman. There are 4 public questions and 2 public statements. Sorry, the questions have been circulated to the committee as required.
Okay, well, the first public question we've got is from Mr. Alex McKinstry, who has now joined us on a microphone. So question number 1, sir, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. Question 1. Can the Chair confirm that if the committee wishes to debate tonight's report on the Bayside restaurant, they will need to vote on whether to exclude the press and public? I well remember this being done at full council on the 10th of January when the sale of council assets was discussed, on which occasion the vote was lost and the debate continued in open session. My understanding is that press and public can only be excluded by resolution of the committee pursuant to Section 1, subsection 2 of the Public Bodies Admissions to Meetings Act 1960. But I'm happy to stand corrected as long as I'm given chapter and verse.
Okay, thank you for your question, Mr. Kinstry. The regulations you quote are incorrect, but the principle is correct. For clarity, the 1960 Act relates to meetings of parish and town councils and not principal councils like BCP. The Local Government Act 1972, Section 100A(4), permits councils to pass a resolution to exclude the press and public from a meeting during an item of business whenever it is likely, in view of the nature of the business to be transacted or the nature of the proceedings, that if members of the public were present during that item, there would be disclosure to them of exempt information. The reasons for exempting an item of business are set out in Schedule 12A of that Act. The resolution to be passed this evening is included in the briefing papers should the committee wish to discuss the detail of the exempt appendices, and will be moved, seconded and voted upon accordingly. And I think there are some other questions, Mr. McKinstry, but they're actually from Mr. Ian Redman, who I believe can't be present here, and you have volunteered to ask them on his behalf. So if we move to his first question, please.
Okay, this is the first question from Mr. Redman. Which senior managers with governance or managerial responsibility were made aware of the losses made by the Bayside? When were they made aware of the losses and what actions did they take? Managerial responsibility would be equivalent to head of destination and culture or above.
Right. It was identified after the first week of operations that Bayside income was not meeting expectations. This was communicated to senior managers within destination and culture. Due to the sunk, namely fixed costs already incurred, the decision was made to continue with the operations, but with advice given to Bayside operator from seafront staff on adaptations to the operation, such as reducing the spend on variable costs, such as food produce, ordering where possible, limiting the spend in line with customer throughput of the restaurants. Senior managers within destination and culture were aware of the anticipated loss for Bayside in September 2022 with the total loss being advised in early November 2022, once all the costs had been confirmed. And there is now question number 2.
Okay, plans for the Bayside began in March 2022 or earlier. The Bayside logo was being promoted on the 25th of April. The caterer and infrastructure suppliers were being booked from May onwards. Why do you say the decision to go ahead with the Bayside was made on or around the 22nd of June, when supplies were being booked and goods purchased from April onwards?
Okay, well, the response to Mr. Redmond's second question is as follows. Planning, including discussions with prospective suppliers for the Bayside restaurant, did begin in March 2022 or earlier, but the decision to go ahead was made on or around the 22nd of June 2022. Any suppliers booked and goods purchased from April onwards and before 22nd of June were the Bournemouth Air Festival related. They were Bournemouth Air Festival related. Bayside was fundamentally a trial to extend the opening period and offer of the 4-day corporate VIP and sponsor dining infrastructure for the Bournemouth Air Festival to a wider restaurant offer and opening period prior to the Air Festival in August 2022. And there is your third and last question on behalf of Mr. Redmond.
Okay, a booking instalment invoice for £5,000 was received from the caterer dated the 5th of May. A Freedom of Information response states it's unclear when the invoice dated the 5th of May was actually received by the council. It is normal practice in the hospitality industry to ask for a deposit or instalment to confirm a booking. A purchase order for £5,000 was then raised on the 13th of July and a procurement waiver approved in late July, both at least 2 months late. Were you correct in saying that there was no breach of the financial regulations?
The council's head of audit and management assurance, who was responsible for the internal audit investigation, is able to say that no financial regulation breach has been identified related to the ordering and payments to the caterer. Although a supplier booking invoice is dated the 5th of May, this invoice was not paid until after the decision to proceed had been made and the formal purchase orders were raised. The invoice was paid on the 20th of July 2023. Councillors on the A&G committee have been provided with the Freedom of Information request response by the officers. Thank you. That completes the questions. Are there any public statements?
Yes, Chairman, two public statements from Mr. McGinstry.
Before I do that, Jack, can you just clarify something? The last response to Mr. Redmond, question 3, you said the invoice was paid on the 20th of July 2023. Should that be 22 or 23?
Okay. The answer I've been drafted here does say 20th of July 2023. It may well be 2022. Mr. Stannard may clarify for us.
Yeah, I am able to clarify that's a mistake, Councillor, and it should say 20th of July 2022.
Okay, apologies, Mr. McClincy. Well spotted. You've got very good recollection of facts. Thank you. So I think you've got some public statements. Are yours or Mr. Redmond's?
They're both from me, if
Okay,
I can clarify. Okay, statement 1. 3.4 of the Bayside summary states the widely held view amongst staff that Bayside was undertaken at councillors' insistence is not reflected in correspondence between Officer A and the portfolio holder for culture and vibrant places. Notwithstanding that assertion, I've received a Freedom of Information response describing how, quote, a formal strategic instruction email, unquote, was sent by the portfolio holder to the service director talking about increasing the quality of the overall offer compared to 2021 and inviting opportunities for local businesses. The Bayside evolved, meanwhile, against the backdrop of the so-called Big Plan, which spoke of harnessing the potential of our coastline of opportunity and which underpinned pretty much everything the Mellor administration did in 2021 to 2022. It's arguable, therefore, that political pressure did shape and inform the Bayside venture, something the committee might wish to explore when contemplating item 8 this evening. Statement 2. I've also used the Freedom of Information Act to obtain a copy of the public interest test, which recommended withholding the Bayside report, and I disagree with it implacably. Especially irksome was the paragraph about protecting the council's commercial interests by withholding details of bids. The two main contractors for Bayside did not have to bid, at least not competitively, one contractor benefiting from procurement waivers to the tune of £185,000. There are other aspects of this case too which warrant public explanation, such as why did the council shoulder most of the risk in this venture? Why was the anticipated profit margin so tight, £36,000, of which 35% would have gone to the main contractors? And what checks were in place to stem the loss of £5,000 a day on average, totalling £173,430 and 19 pence of public money?
Thank you, Mr. McKenzie, for those public statements. And I don't think there's any petitions, so that concludes item 5, public issues. Item 6 on the agenda is the external audit draft audit findings report 2021-2022. The actual report starts on numbered page 21 of the agenda pack. We have Mr. Peter Barber of Grant Thornton online, and he's waiting to present his report. So the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, committee. So, as set out by the Chair, item 6 on today's agenda is our draft audit findings report for 21-22. I'm joined on the Teams call today by my colleague George Amos, who is the in charge for the 21-22 audit and has delivered a large part of the work undertaken to date and has supported the wider team in delivering the work, and he is here to assist me in responding to any questions on the detailed work should there be any. So, as you will see at the time of drafting this report, our audit was well progressed, and I'm pleased to be able to report that further progress has been made in the intervening period, but this report does set out the main findings arising from our work to date. But perhaps before I go into the detail, I thought it would probably be helpful to just reflect on the direction of travel within the council in terms of producing complete, accurate and timely financial statements. As you will see on page 27 of your papers, the 21-22 draft accounts again has resulted in a large number of changes to the financial information presented for audit. However, these are less in number and less impactful than the prior year. And my reflection as the appointed auditor is this, combined with the more timely responses in the main to audit queries from finance officers, has resulted in a smoother audit than the prior year, and that is, relative. And it does also recognise, and as I've articulated in this report, it does recognise that further improvements are still required going forward. And if I were to summarise those, it would be the need for further quality assurance work to make sure the accounts are right first time, and in some areas more comprehensive working papers to support those draft accounts. And ultimately, that helps in a number of ways, because it means that you will have a more timely reporting of my opinion. It also reduces the work that your finance officers have to do in responding to my detailed queries, and ultimately it can, and hopefully will going forward, reduce additional fees that I charge for future years. So that's just a bit of a background in terms of direction of travel. But as I said, as set out on page 27, there were again this year a number of material errors identified in the draft accounts. As with the prior year, these were in the main in relation to the property, plant and equipment disclosures in your accounts. So the very large figure at the top of your balance sheet. Interestingly, although the errors and the changes that have been made to the revised accounts were large in value and number, a number of them went one way and a number of them went the other way. So fortuitously, the net impact was actually interestingly below materiality. Suffice to say that all those changes have been agreed with officers and will be reflected in the revised set of accounts. In terms of outstanding work, this is detailed on page 29 of your pack on the right hand side, and I'll just briefly run through those bullet points and just give the committee an updated position on that outstanding work. As I mentioned just now, property, plant and equipment is a particular area of focus for us, including infrastructure. Pleased to be able to report that was outstanding a week and a half ago. Work is now complete. The work was finished yesterday. It is subject pending review, but that work is now there and is just subject to that review process that will happen over the next day or two. The expenditure and funding analysis note, that is one of the areas that remains outstanding. We have a number of queries out with officers and are awaiting response to that, and we are very much focusing on seeking those responses and concluding that within the next week. The third bullet point refers to income. Pleased to be able to report that that's all done with no further issues arising that I need to bring to the attention of this committee. The fourth bullet point relates to receipts in advance, and this has identified some issues that are captured in the report, some changes to the draft accounts. That the sample we chose initially, given the errors, necessitated an extension of that sample. Since drafting this report, more errors have been found in that area, and that will result in a further non-material adjustment to the accounts that will be reflected in the final set of accounts. And when I do bring back a final version of this report to a later meeting of this committee, I will clearly articulate that in totality and the impact on the restatement. The group accounts work is limited in terms of outstanding work, but it necessitates final consolidation checks once the agreed amendments have been made and will be done at the end. And then further down, we then highlight again the well-trodden route of the pension fund liability, the big liability at the bottom of your balance sheet. As discussed at previous meetings, we still await the letter of assurance from the auditor of Dorset Pension Fund. My latest communications with them would be that would be provided this side of Christmas, but clearly conclusion of this audit is dependent on that being received. We have probably 2 weeks of resource left now on the BCP audit, and we continue to work with finance officers over the next 2 weeks to ensure that all of these outstanding areas are concluded, recognising that letter of assurance is reliant on a third party. So once that work is concluded, we will be bringing back a final version of this report. I could have waited before I brought you this draft report, but I thought it was important that members did see the findings to date, given how far through the audit we are. And when we do bring that final version back, clearly that will also include a management response to the recommendations that inevitably arise as a result of this work. And as I said, we are hopeful that will then enable us to sign off, and subject to that letter of assurance from the auditors of Dorset Pension Fund, we hope that will be early in the new year, and our anticipated opinion is a clean, unqualified opinion. And that's important, that, you know, despite the changes that will inevitably arise, that we are at the moment, based on work completed, in a position to issue that unqualified opinion subject to that outstanding work. I do appreciate that the report is very detailed. It isn't my intention to go through the whole report, but the one area that I do need to draw to members' attention, I just need to get the page number here. 73 of your papers, which is the audit fees. Just to really apologise, because I do realise, and it is a faux pas on my part, given that we are the auditors, that the information in the fees page unfortunately does not cast. That said, you'll see a lot of to be determined in there, and that's because clearly the final fees cannot be determined until we've completed our work, and we're not quite there yet. Rest assured that when you do get the final version of this report, hopefully at the next meeting of this committee, that will contain the final position and that all the numbers will properly cast. So, Chair, I will stop there, but happy to take any questions on the detailed report.
Okay, thank you for that. I think it should be emphasised and made clear that these are for financial accounts for the year 2021-2022, which is 18 months or so ago. So it's, very historic in that respect. And you mentioned that, yes, this is a draft. It's going to be brought back. It's going to be sorted. I think we do have a meeting of A&G in January. Do you think it's likely to be ready, the final report to be received and thus accepted in January?
Chair, you're absolutely right. These are 21-22 financial statements, and yes, audit is a retrospective exercise. It is done after the year end, and within the public sector we do adopt a substantive approach, which means we wait for the draft accounts and then we audit the numbers and do detailed work in relation to the breakdown that makes up those disclosures. So yes, I recognise that it's some time ago, and that reflects the journey that we're on with the council to try and catch up and bring back some sort of timeliness to the reporting, recognising that is a national issue. In terms of your specific question about January, I can't recall the exact date, but I think it's early in January. Clearly, we have a number of leave commitments over Christmas. It is dependent, Chair, really on when we get that IS19 letter from pension fund letter from Deloitte. It's not just a case of getting that letter and putting it on our file. We do have to read it, and in the past it has identified the need for further work on our behalf. Not always, but it is often the case, and therefore I am completely reliant on what that letter says. My commitment is to work with officers, and our team to work with officers to make sure that that is the only thing that is outstanding when we go for the Christmas break. But I suspect, if we're being realistic and based on what happened last year and the further delays, that we are probably being a bit optimistic with January, and it will probably be February. Okay,
well, our next meeting is scheduled for the 11th of January as opposed to the end of the month. So, if there are or will be a delay, then there will be a delay. Obviously waited this long, so another month, have to be. So I've got an indication from Councillor Phipps to say something.
Yeah, it was, you sort of started on something I was going to go ask a question on. What I was going to say was, how confident are you that you will get this pension fund letter? I mean, these people have got form, haven't they? I mean, at the end of the day, look what happened last time. And that was my worry as well. And you've just raised that as to, hopefully you're going to get it this side of Christmas, you said. Are you actively chasing it, and does it do any good if you actively chase it anyway? I mean, can you give us a little bit more information on what is actually being done to push these people along to get this letter, the letter that, that never seems to appear every year? It's just crazy. Can you just give us a little bit more on that? How can you actually see that, otherwise we're going to get to January. Oh, sorry, but no, we haven't got the letter. But actually, how active are we in trying to get it is what I'm coming at, where I'm coming from.
Through you, Chair, if I may. Yeah, thank you, Councillor Phipps. And I think it is, this is almost a rerun, isn't it, of what happened last year. And clearly there are limitations in terms of the levers that can be exerted to get that letter. I know that management and senior officers have sought to engage directly with Dorset Council to do that. And I know the previous chair of this committee is a member of Dorset Pension Fund committee and sought to further and emphasise the importance of a timely response. I think that there is probably extra pressure on the auditors of Dorset Pension Fund this year to do this. Public sector audit appointments, who clearly appoint all the auditors to all the councils and pension funds in the country, are acutely aware that when a pension fund auditor is not able to give a letter of assurance, that has an impact on all the admitted bodies that need their accounts signed off. So it's not just yourself. There are a number of audits that we audit that have that can't be signed off until we've had this letter, and there are a number of other firms in the same position. So I know that PSAA are exerting further pressure on the auditors of all pension funds where there's outstanding letters to ensure that that is done in a timely manner. We digress slightly, but there is moves afoot that's been discussed within the sector about a backstop and a end date when all audits for a certain year must be signed off. And that's the end of March has been mentioned amongst other dates, and I suspect that there will be ever increasing pressure as that date approaches for those or responsible for pension funds to furnish admitted body auditors with that letter. I do periodically communicate with the pension fund auditor, and I will do it again this week, probably tomorrow. And when I get a response, I will update officers. Either way, what happens, I will be in attendance at the January meeting, and I will be able to give a further update, recognising that that's only 5 weeks away.
Okay. We've got Councillor Connolly, who is online, indicated next. So Councillor Connolly.
Thank you. Yeah, quick question. The report mentions 4 significant weaknesses in the value for money arrangements. What is the best place to see the follow-up on them? Where do you anticipate we will be able to see how the council has progressed in addressing those? Is that something that this year's report is likely to cover, or will we see it better in the more recent one?
For those wanting to know where they are, that's on page 53, or our numbered page 53 of the agenda.
Through you, Chair, if I may. Thank you, Councillor Connolly. Yes, so members will recall that we did bring the auditor's annual report that summarised the findings of our VFM work for 21, 22 and 22, 23 to a previous meeting of this committee, and you're absolutely right, it did contain 4 significant weaknesses. Clearly, we will follow those up formally as part of our 23-24 VFM work. I mean, that's not due to start for some time, but you may recall that at the meeting where we presented that auditor's annual report, I did say, given the significance of the issues arising, that I am holding and having periodical meetings with the chief exec, the director of finance, the portfolio holder for finance, to discuss progress. And I realised that those were reported to other forums. So I am in contact with the council in terms of progress, and the progress that is made will be reflected in our next year's report, and ultimately will impact on whether those weaknesses remain or are removed going forward.
Thank you for that. Councillor Armstrong indicating next.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I want to acknowledge all the work that you do on the audit. It must be incredibly frustrating when information from organisations that are managing our pension pot, for example, are late. Not only late, but significantly late in handing this information over. So I'm quite new to this committee, but I would like to know why there has been a delay with this important piece of information. I'd like to check that there isn't, or if there is, I'd like to know what is the impact for BCP employees, and also for our own financial position. Are some of the costs, the additional charges that I'm seeing in your report, are they as a result of this delay in this really important piece of information coming to us?
Through you, Chair, if I can, thank you, Councillor Armstrong. I'm not sure I can answer all of those questions, but I'll see what I can do in terms of the pension fund information. Clearly, this is a within the public sector. Auditors are there is a tripartite agreement where auditors of pension funds are obliged to undertake work on the behalf of admitted bodies, including BCP, to provide assurances over the controls that operate over member data within pension funds. And clearly, BCP is a member of Dorset Pension Fund Local Government Pension Scheme, and therefore that is in theory, an efficient way of me as the appointed auditor at BCP getting assurances that member data for BCP employees and pensioners is properly held, and therefore the actuary who calculates the figures gets the right information. So that is the theory behind it, but clearly that falls down when there are significant delays in getting that letter of assurance. I am desperate to get it because I want to conclude the BCP audit. BCP Council are desperate for me to get it because they want it concluded, but ultimately we are relying on that third party. In terms of the financial position and the impacts on the council, do we charge more money for the IS19 work? Yes, we do, and we have done in prior years, because actually the delay last year, for example, meant that the audit was delayed so much that an updated triennial valuation came out for all pension funds that meant the council had to rerun their letter, their request from the actuary, and we had to re-audit it. So there are financial consequences, and the additional fee last year did include extra fee in that regard. As to the impact on BCP employees, I'll let officers answer, but I don't think there is a direct impact of the delay in signing the accounts, other than clearly you could argue there's a reputational risk as well by continued delay and speculation. I mean, I would emphasise again that our work has not indicated anything that would lead us to anything other than an unqualified opinion, a clean opinion, but I'm not in that position as yet.
Okay, thank you for that. I've got an indication now for a question or a comment from one of our independent members, and in fact, it was amiss of me earlier on to welcome Sam Acton as well as Lindy Jansen van Vuren, and I think the latter's got a question or a comment to make. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair, through you. On page 43, there's a material adjustment of 63 million, and the materiality is 13 million. So it is quite significant. I just wanted to know whether this adjustment is due to management's oversight, because it's listed as an audit adjustment, or was it picked up by the auditors, or did management actually identify before the auditors picked that up? And then with regards to my questions on the PPE, I will wait for the final audit when I think you're still busy with some of the PPE work. I'll wait for that. Thank you.
Through you, Chair, if I may, I'm just trying to.
Can you repeat which
understand
page,
which page it is?
43, page 43. Thank you.
Right, I'm just looking at page 40. I'm just wondering if that's the big. I'm looking at the big 43 on the left-hand side, or is it the 43 of our report? I can't see anything on the big 43.
It's in your audit adjustments page.
Oh, it's further down. Bear with me. So it's let me just go down to the right.
Oh, so it's page 67 of
right,
the BCP
thank
agenda.
You, Chair. Thank you.
But yes, page 43 of your document. So page 67 for people looking at it agenda wise.
Okay, right. So that's quite an easy one, and this is they're very large figures, aren't they? But it actually sort of ties in with my previous response to Councillor Armstrong. So it's quite a convoluted explanation, but it's important that the draft accounts that we're auditing 21-22 were produced before we had concluded the 2021 audit. The 2021 audit was delayed to such a point that the triennial valuation for the pension fund took place, which provided more up-to-date information on liabilities, and as a result, the council had to go back and asked the actuary to recalculate the liability at the 31st of March 2021. But also that triennial valuation then had an impact on the liability at the 31st of March 2022. And therefore this 63 million is the reduction in that liability as a result of an updated triennial valuation. So officers produced the figures in the draft accounts with the most up-to-date information available. New information arose as a result of the triennial valuation, and therefore the updated accounts have been updated to reflect that. So it's no reflection on anything untoward in terms of calculation by officers. It just reflects the updated situation. So it is an adjusting post-balance sheet event.
Okay, thank you for that. Oh, Councillor Armstrong again, you got to come back.
Yes, it's with regards to the fact that we are liable or we're paying additional costs on the back of this information being late. Can we not reclaim that money, or can we issue penalties to this organisation for it sounds like they're consistently late in providing that information.
I think, as Mr. Bob said, it's a nationwide problem. So it's something which obviously you and the other large firms of accountants, I'm sure, are conscious about. And, yes, echoing the comments of my fellow councillor, is it something that your industry is actually concentrating on to get it moved forward in terms of speeding things up?
Thank you, Chair. So just in terms of penalties, clearly, any work that we undertake on discharging our role is billed to the council, BCP. So you do pick up the bill for every work, all the work we do. And I appreciate, and this is a bugbear of many councils, that you are subject to the delivery or otherwise of a third party. And the only way we're not going to be doing lots of extra work on this in any normal year, because until we get that letter, we don't do anything in that particular aspect of the work we need to undertake. It was just a bit of an anomaly last year because of the triennial evaluation. Clearly, by definition, a triennial evaluations happens every 3 years, so that there isn't going to be the risk of the continued delay in me completing this audit resulting in a similar scenario to last year. So there's unlikely to be any direct additional charge this year, other than the fact that if the letter has lots of issues in it that require me to do further work, and until I get that letter, I don't know. But there isn't, to the best of my knowledge, any recompense for you in terms of going back to the auditors of Dorset Pension Fund.
Okay, thank you for that. Well, I think we could give it a good airing. We've got a recommendation there on page 21 of the agenda. I'll read it out for the people who haven't got it. It's recommended that Audit and Governance Committee notes the anticipated audit opinion and the draft findings of the Council's external auditor following the audit of the Council's Statement of Accounts 2021-2022. Can I have somebody to make that as a proposal and somebody to second it, please? Councillor Fitzley is proposing. Oh, and Councillor Council is seconding. So yes, okay, we'll take that as accepted. Thank you. Oh, Mr. Cox, Councillor Cox, sorry, I missed you. Before we have some show of hands, you've got an observation or a question?
I was just going to thank Mr. Barber for all the work they've done, and just pleased to see that that this year's gone a lot smoother than the previous year. I did have a question which Lindy had already asked, but one of the other questions I did have was in respect of the problems with Deloitte's and the pension scheme. My understanding last year was that the partner was ill, and I'm assuming he made a recovery. So I don't understand why the same problem seems to be happening again. Is he ill again, or we changed partners, or do we know?
Okay, how's he getting on this person?
Through you, Chair. So my understanding is it is the same partner, and he is back working because he's been communicating with me. I'm advised that it's resourcing challenges on their side. And just
and to be fair, I think that's the case with every single firm of auditors in the country, from what I understand anyway. One question I was going to ask Mr. Barber was in terms of next year's audit, the 2023. Do you have any timescales for that? And does it have to wait for you to sign off the 22 before you can start the 23? What's the question?
So timescales, it's a good question, because I mean we did agree with officers some time ago that we would look to catch up and that we would start 22-23 subject to a reflection on how 21-22 went once we'd completed 21-22. Now clearly that takes us into the early part of next year. Some members of this committee, and I alluded to it in some, I think one of my earlier answers, that there is moves afoot to set a deadline by which, if a set of accounts for a particular year have not been signed, that they would introduce what they call a backstop, which is it's an attempt by DLUC to reset the audit system in local government. So lots of dates have been banded around. The end of March has been banded around. The end of September has been banded around. There's no firm decisions. Clearly, there's been a change in minister recently following the reshuffle. So there is a possibility that there might be an end date set by which a certain year's set of accounts need to be concluded, and a view that if they are not concluded by that date, then a disclaimer will be issued by the auditor saying that no substantive work has been undertaken on these sets of accounts, and that will then, in theory, allow the auditors to catch up and kick off 23-24 in a more timely manner, recognising if that is the situation, those 23-24 accounts will be more involved because there will be further work required to get assurances over opening balances. But this is all speculation. But I suspect that will become clear one way or the other soon.
Okay, thank you for that. We've got a proposition that's been seconded. Can we just basically to note the draft report? Okay, and that's unanimous. Effectively. Thank you for that, Mr. Barber. You can stand down to the 11th of January.
Thank you, Chair.
Happy New Year.
Thank you. Thank you.
Right, moving on. Item 7. It's the review of the council's constitution and the recommendations of the Constitutional Review Working Group. Basically, you've got the report there. The report summarises the issues considered by the working group and sets out a series of recommendations to this committee. One thing I should emphasise is that we as a committee cannot change the constitution. Anything that we decide this evening, perhaps accepting what's been suggested by the working group, will have to go to full council. It's a meeting in early January. In terms of the report, I think Councillor Margaret Phipps, you being the chairperson of that working group party, I'll pass it over to you to present their recommendations. Over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. Shall I do one at a time? Because do you want to do the planning one first and have a discussion?
I should emphasise that there are 3 or 4 recommendations. The principal one is to do with the planning and planning committee, etc. There is also TAG, Transport Advisory Group, and there is some to do with licensing as well, I believe. But if
it's not a recommendation. Well, yeah, it's just
some suggestions.
Additional consequential formatting.
But I think the main one is to do with planning.
Yeah. So
if we do with planning
which
first,
is planning, and B, which is transport advisory. Shall I do them one at a time?
We'll do them separately.
Yeah.
And then yes, we'll see how we progress. I don't think it's necessary to take a separate vote. But
if I do them one at a time, then if there's a discussion on one, then do discussion on the second. That's what I was thinking. Yeah.
We do have joining us online the chairman of the planning committee, Marion Napoleon. So at the appropriate point in time, I will bring her in for any comments that she's got to make. Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chairman. Okay, I'll just sort of run you through really what we were discussed at the Constitution Working Group. Basically, it's the new administration has agreed to have 2 planning committees instead of 1. We also want to change the traffic regulation order decision making, and we're going to come to that. And so the discussion the Constitution Working Group, we've been discussing both of these issues, and they are in the paper before you. So first of all, the Planning Committee. So this council has operated with a single planning committee since it was formed in 2019. However, over the time in the last 4 years, many requests have been made for area-based committees. Other councils do this, certainly Dorset Council do this, and they are seen to support more localised decision making. I, for one, have been quite vocal on it, and I think it's a very good idea that we do have more localised decision making. So the working group have been discussing how we're going to achieve 2 committees, and we have agreed the following, and this is what is now coming to you to discuss and hopefully agree with us. So the number of area-based committees will be 2, split on an east and west basis. They're to be named the Eastern BCP Planning Committee and the Western BCP Planning Committee. And there was some discussion on that actually as to what we would call them. And the good thing is that the planning service is already being restructured to establish east and west teams. And alignment with those is very, very important for the efficient working of the council. So the dividing line between these 2 areas should follow formal ward boundaries. We can't go splitting wards in half. And the 2 specific areas, it was decided, would be determined using data that we've already got as best possible to equally balance the officer workload for each area and for the committee workloads as well, and the numbers of councillors. And we did have officers from planning at our working group meetings to give us advice on this. They are happy with the decision that the group has made. Now, it may be that some applications will fall cross-boundary, so they may be a bit in one ward and a bit in another ward, which is on one in the east and one in the west. And if that happens, we thought to allocate the application to the committee with the greatest proportion of land area within the red line of the application. It will be necessary to establish, if the calculated area is the same, which is highly unlikely, but you never know, that this is provided for in the Constitution revisions. So we have thought of that. Our preferred number of members on each committee is 11. The political balance rules will apply to each committee, but local representation will be encouraged within political groups. There should be engagement, we thought, sort of internally with group leaders on that. And that is all set out in paragraphs 24 to 28. But the allocation of seats by political balance to each political group is a matter for council at the annual meeting. Substitute members will be permitted, just the same as they are now. We thought there should be a quarterly briefing for all area planning committee members, and this would promote consistency then across the whole area. We looked at 3 different options as to where the split would go, but the preferred option was number 3, which it is in your paperwork. It was the best fit for historic workload and councillor numbers. And there's a map on page 80 and a table on page 81. So the working group are aware that option 3 does have a bit of a small imbalance in councillors, but it does provide the closest division of workload for both the committee and, more importantly, the officers in the core service, because that's really important, because they're going to have to do all the work for each committee. We thought meetings of each area committee should be held in the daytime, as they are at the moment, but alternating 2 weekly schedules and at the Civic Centre in Bournemouth, just as they are now. But we thought it was a good idea to do a review after 12 months to see how things are working out. Just another issue that did come up, and paragraph 31 deals with this, is training, because it was considered vital for all members and substitutes on planning committees to have training, and this is covered in the Constitution changes. And so a new section has been inserted in Article 8 referencing mandatory training. But for consistency, and this chairman did mention this, although this includes reference to the planning committee and also the transport advisory group, the other item in the report, together with licensing and appeals, being the other quasi-judicial committees. And you'll see that on pages 114, changes to the Constitution, paragraph 8.4, we have included them because mandatory training we did feel for all of these committees was the best way. If you're doing it for one, you do it for them all. As an aside, the planning committee will require some additional resources, and these are mentioned at paragraphs 42 to 45. And the proposed constitution changes are set out in the recommendation at Appendix 1. If this is agreed here, it has to go to full council. We would be looking at implementation of this change to 2 committees from May 2024. So that's all I've got to say on that. Richard has done quite a lot of work on this. May wish to add to what I've said, I'm not sure, and he's also available to answer questions. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that very good presentation. Can I say at this juncture, I congratulate Richard Jones on the tremendous work he's done in putting this together. The knock-on effect of just one little change with all the adjustments you have to make to the Constitution is immense. And with his additional other duties that he's taken on, he needs to be congratulated with what he has presented here in effectively a fairly tight time schedule. I've got an indication from her to have a question or a comment. So if it's very technical, will be Richard to be answering. Okay.
My question is about the mandatory training. I think giving people information is no guarantee that they're going to absorb and understand it. Can we bring in some kind of test or some kind of measure of understanding competence that people are required to meet a sort of minimum before being able to continue on a committee?
Who wants to deal with that, Richard?
I think we can. I think we can certainly explore that. I mean, the training at the moment is quite detailed in terms of the training that takes place. There are case studies that also take place during that process as well. But whether I'm not sure we've ever formalised a test in that sense. But it's certainly something we can look at and explore. Chairman, whilst I just have the microphone. Councillor Phipps covered everything that I actually had on my list. The only thing I was just going to highlight was paragraph 33, was that there are no proposed changes to the public participation or other procedures in relation to the committees. But other than that, I think you covered everything, Councillor Phipps.
Thank you for that. Got Councillor Rampton indicating next.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of questions, if I may. And first of all, the finance. So 2 committees and an extra SRA of almost £11,000 seems quite a lot when it's half the work that it is at the moment. So I've got a question about that. And then at paragraph, I think it's 46, I understand that includes tag 41,300. Is that plus the SRAs or is that inclusive of the SRAs? And another question I have is, how will it work in terms of, I read that you can be on both committees, should you wish to. What about substitutes? If you're on the West Committee, can you substitute on the East Committee? Because it's actually going to be quite difficult for some smaller groups to be able to service these committees. And I did have another question, but I think that'll do for now. Thank you.
Okay, 2 or 3 questions there. Mr. Jones, I think the first one was about a special responsibility allowances, SRAs, that's what it means. And we actually did discuss this at the working group on the basis that, yes, there is a figure written down in tablets of stone at the moment, but I think every year or every other year, there is another organisation or body that gives advice to the council about remunerations and reviewing them. And potentially, if it is identified that the workload of the committees, the 2 committees, is substantially lower, then certainly that figure could come down. But Mr. Jones, can you fill in with some more information on that?
Indeed, and Councillor Ramsden perhaps pick up anything I don't answer. So in terms of the special responsibility allowance, so the change that is proposed in the Constitution is simply making it for both committees. There would be, as the chair has said, an independent remuneration panel that will be convened once council has approved these changes. We will then engage the IRP to undertake that review of allowances, and they will take into consideration the potential impact of that on the SRA. In terms of the financial implications and the costs, they are in addition to the SRA. So that's based on the number of meetings for democratic services. There's a ratio that is calculated to calculate with all the on costs, I should add, in relation to those costs. And in terms of substitutes, there would certainly be nothing to prevent a member who serves on for instance, the Eastern Committee being a substitute on the Western one, and vice versa.
Chair, if I may come back, I suppose my question was more about if you were a substitute or, a trained planning member, but not actually sitting on a committee, would you be able to substitute on a different committee from the one that that was in your patch, as it were?
So I think the question is, you are a member of the Western Committee and somebody in your group, let's say, is sick or whatever, could you act as a sub because they happen to be on the Eastern Committee?
Yeah, I think Councillor Ramsden is saying that the member may not be a member of either committee, but a recognised substitute, and absolutely you could substitute on both West and East.
Thank you. Oh, Councillor Armstrong.
I just want to say that I absolutely hugely support anything that's about local decision making and better community engagement. So I'd really acknowledge the work that you've done on the working group to look at this. I'm kind of wondering though, as when we formed in 2019 as a BCP, was this something that was ever looked at as an option? And my concern is just about adding additional costs, given that we're constrained at the moment. But I'd also in ensuring that by working and adopting this new model, are we going to make efficiencies and savings?
Thank you for that. I can probably answer your first point. Why wasn't this done from day one? Well, the constitution of BCP Council was effectively decided by the shadow authority, and they gave us the rules to start with. And yes, we are now 4 or 5 years later on. The suggestions are to improve it from what we were presented with initially. Councillor Phipps, I think you've got some background.
Could I just come in on that, because I was on the shadow authority as well.
Oh, excellent.
And I do recall when this actually was brought up at the shadow authority, and I was one of the ones from Christchurch that said, hang on a minute, we don't want just one planning committee. And what we were told at the time, and the vote went through, there's nothing we could do about it, was, well, it's just for starters, this is what you're going to have, this is how we're going to start it off, and we can always review it. But of course it never did get reviewed, and here we are now 4 years later, and I'm so pleased that we are actually reviewing it. But I was there as well, and that's how it went as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Marion Pavodian, sorry.
Pedvin.
My pronunciation is terrible. Yes, that's right.
2 syllables.
Marion.
Pedvin.
You've read the report, and I know you've been thinking about this yourself. Do you have any observations or comments? Is this something that you support or you don't like at all?
I very much support it, and I've really supported it since before BCP even existed, when we were getting the shadow constitution and we were learning that there was only going to be one planning committee. I was then a member of pool planning committee, and we regularly had 6, 7, 8 items at each meeting. And I could not conceive how, with an authority that was 2.5 to 3 times the size, that one committee could possibly deal with that number of items per meeting. because the suggestion wasn't that we would have the meetings are slightly more frequent, but not very much more frequent, certainly not twice as frequent. And this has proved correct. The way it's been handled is that we just don't get that number of applications to consider at any of the meetings. But it does mean that therefore that applications are not getting the democratic consideration and the local consideration, local representation that many of us feel they should have. This item did actually come as a motion to BCP Council during the previous 4 years. It was actually proposed by Councillor Phipps, and I was very pleased to be able to second it, but it didn't at that time get carried. And so we've continued with the just the one committee. I share and agree with the concerns about, for instance, consistency across the two committees, and therefore the regular briefings, mandatory training, definitely I agree with. And one way that possibly could ensure consistency would be if it was that the chair of, say, the West became also the vice chair of the Eastern Committee and vice versa, so that there would be at least 2 people who were attending both committees on a regular basis and very much aware of how things were moving and how things were working. Looking at the map, the boundary does look a bit odd, but I do accept that because of the data, it's really, there is no option but to have what it is. Wallace Down and Winton are stuck out a bit, encroaching onto the Western Territory, shall we say. But I accept that that is really the only viable way of setting up the boundaries. So, as I say, I've wanted this for more than the last 5 years, since before we set up BCP. So I'm absolutely delighted that it looks as though it's at last going to happen, and I very much support it.
Okay, Councillor Chapman-Law.
On the sort of the workload side of things, I would argue that chair of planning is probably the hardest job outside of cabinet. The meetings often last in excess of 4-5 hours. So I think to say that their workload would not be sufficient for the SRA is probably yeah, it's not correct in any way, shape or form.
Okay, thank you for that. I've got a question which was raised by somebody at the Working Party, and Councillor Phipps was talking about the fact that there will have to be political balance in the 2 committees. There are obviously some groups on the council, Christchurch Independents and the Poole Independent Group, who obviously represent Christchurch and Poole respectively, but because of the number of councillors each of those 2 groups have got, Mr. Jones could probably answer it. I think I know the answer. Somebody from Christchurch is going to have to be on the Western Committee, and somebody from Poole is going to have to be on the Eastern one, perhaps.
Chair, we did discuss the working group, and you're absolutely right. The issue with political balance, though, is the political group numbers can change over time, and therefore that shouldn't be a condition almost at this point for you to consider. That will be a matter for council. I have run some numbers through, and you're absolutely right in terms of Christchurch. I'll use Christchurch Independents as an example. They would have an entitlement to at least 1 seat on the eastern area, even if they took their 2 seats. I think it was on the eastern area. So there would be a way of overcoming that, but it would require council or no one at council dissenting, and I think we shouldn't seek that sort of level at this point. So I think there is likely to be cross committee representation. Chair, can I just, whilst I've got you, and Councillor Phipps, apologies, I'm just going to, in terms of the chair and vice chair issue, in terms of perhaps the chair could be the vice chair on the other committee. The law of meetings actually requires the first meeting of each committee to determine its chair and vice chairman. We couldn't stipulate that in the constitution. So that's not a provision. That's not to say it couldn't happen, but it would have to be the wish of the respective committees at that time.
Thank you for that. I think on the point about Poole councillors and Christchurch councillors, there's an awful lot of councillors on BCP who don't actually live in their ward, and they may well actually live in the east, even though they represent something in the west. So that problem can be overcome perhaps where you live, because you will have local knowledge. So given that a good Councillor Phillips, you've got something up.
Just going to come back on that. That's all. That at the end of the day, when doing this, there may be the odd anomaly, but as you say, political groups change. But at the end of the day, this is going to encourage local representation. And you would certainly think that a political group is going to say, well, those that live in the east mainly will be representative on the east and the same on the west. I'm sure that's how it's going to work. So I just leave it at that.
Okay, thank you for that. Moving on. Councillor Herriot, sorry.
As someone who lives and is the ward councillor for literally the weirdest ward, as Councillor Padavin identified, the one that's sticking out. I suppose, what is the impact if the change of applications is significantly shifts, obviously, and has the local plan been borne in mind as future? Because in 2 years this could be horribly out of date and we could end up having to redress the balance, I suppose, of east and west. And is there a provision for that? Did that make any sense? Sorry, I kind of meandered all over the place.
Could you repeat the question?
If the amount of planning applications and referred applications significantly shifts, will there have to be a significant redress in the east and west? And has the local plan been considered in terms of this balance and where that building is going to happen?
Okay, well, at the end of the day, we are suggesting that there is a review to this in about 12 months, and you may just, if you're lucky, get a local plan in 12 months. So at the moment, we have to start the process, and we just have to do it and see how it goes. We could have a review before 12 months if we find we need one. I'm sure that could be arranged. So, we just have to see how it goes. It was like we started off with one committee. We didn't know how that was going to work, did we? And the local plan will come forward. And actually that may help, because at the moment we've got about 300 policies over 3 plans. And when we have a new local plan, there'll be less than 100. So it's going to help the situation, I would say. Thank you.
Quite right. The adoption of the local plan will speed up decision making because it will be far clearer. Okay, given that a good airing. Oh, Councillor Coburn.
Yes, why are we not able to have political balance across the 2 committees, east and west, and then
Richard will tell you.
Yeah, so as if for all 22 members, and then east west almost be like subcommittees that then can be geographical, or even Poole and Christchurch agree between themselves to swap if they wish to.
That was considered by the working party, and there is a very good legal technical answer which Mr. Jones can emphasise for us. We did think about that.
I would probably need to read the regulations, but there are regulations in terms of political balance. So we have to do a calculation of the proportionality of each group as a council. We then have to apply that to each committee on political balance as far as practically possible. But there is a provision that allows council to appoint committees other than by political balance, which is what that arrangement would be. But the condition on that is that no one at council votes against it, so there can be no dissent for that proposal. So that is achievable, but it would need whole council agreement.
Okay, thank you for that. The next, Councillor Rent.
Thank you, Chair. Just a brief comment, if I may. Obviously, I'm not usually on this committee, so I don't really know how it usually works. But it just seems a pity that we don't have options 1 and options 2 in front of us, nice and clear. That we have option 3, but I would have liked to have seen the other options, because it seems as if we're just being asked to kind of tick a box for cabinet by only seeing the one option. Thank you.
Councillor Phipps, can you?
Yeah, I'll just say that obviously we were the working group, and we were to come up with a recommendation, which is basically what we have, and we felt it was the best one based on the workload, especially for officers. So this is actually our recommendation. I understand you might have liked to have seen the others potentially, but we've asked for a recommendation, and basically that's what you've got. So
Mr. Jones?
Just if I can, obviously the principle was an east and west, so clearly it was a meandering of the lines between. In reality, when you looked at the numbers and the ones that provided the closest balance that we've listed, they affected the wards of Redhill and Northbourne, Talbot and Branksome Woods, Wallasdown and Winton West. They were the three that we were. Once you go outside those, the numbers then skewed quite significantly. So those were the three mixes that we sort of threw into the mix.
Okay. Basically, this entire report, if it's passed by this committee, would be going as a recommendation to full council, and with a recommendation that option 3 is the one that is adopted. At the end of the day, it's full council that is the final decision maker. So every councillor can put their vote up, vote for it or against it. We are only making recommendations this evening. If we can move on to the second issue, which is on agenda page 83 for those looking at it that way. Issue 2, establishment of Transportation Advisory Group, or TAG, where we use that abbreviation from now on. Back to you, Councillor Phipps again.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I'll call it TAG. You all know what it is, Transport Advisory Group. So at the moment, the council refers all traffic regulation orders and other transport related matters to Cabinet for approval. And the new administration has indicated that they would like to promote more community involvement and local representation on issues in areas, and asked the working group to consider the introduction of Transport Advisory Group. I think other councils did have these in the past. We certainly had one in Christchurch. I believe other areas did too. So the working group are recommending that a Transport Advisory Group be established again from May 2024, as with the Planning Committee. And these are the following principles that we thought it should be based upon. The membership comprises of 1 member from each formally constituted political group. Only non-executive members may serve on the group, not Cabinet members, because their recommendation from TAG will go to Cabinet. Ward councillors can attend and make representations. There'll be no substitute members, as this is just an advisory group. Training of TAG members, again, should be mandatory. TAG meetings shall be open to the public and where possible live streamed. So we are asking, making it open so the public can come along and have their say. They'll be scheduled in the daytime and approximately 2 weeks before each Cabinet to allow decisions to be processed through Cabinet then quite quickly. Where there are no significant or contentious objections in relation to a traffic regulation order, we're suggesting that the decision should be delegated to officers, because there are so many traffic regulation orders that come through, and if there's no dissent on them, well, we already do it with planning. Surely we thought that would be the best way to go. And obviously public participation will be allowed. That's the whole point of this, that people can come and have their say if they want to, if they have a burning desire to speak about a certain issue. So having taken advice as well from the monitoring officer, it was decided to establish TAG as an informal consultative group rather than a formal advisory body reporting to Cabinet. Because formal advisory bodies would have conditions imposed which could be contrary to a number of the principles that we want to achieve, such as political balance and executive membership as well. I'm sure if anybody wants to delve into that further, the monitoring officer or Richard will certainly be able to give you more information. Any observations and feedback that comes out of TAG will be put into a schedule and go to the following meeting of Cabinet for determination. That schedule should contain details of the traffic regulation order, the recommendation of officers, the feedback of TAG. They may agree with officers or they may not. And if they don't, then there should be a reason put on the schedule as to why they don't agree and why their decision varies from that of the officers. The chair of TAG should present the schedule to the cabinet, and then the cabinet makes the final decision. As before, TAG will require some additional resources, again mentioned at paragraphs 42 to 45. And the constitution, the proposed constitution changes are set out in the recommendation and on pages 84 at appendix 2. I think I'll leave it there because Richard is chapter and verse on the constitution. I'm sure he will be able to very ably answer questions. Thank you.
Okay, Richard, would you like to fill in extra information to help us, please?
Chair, I think again, Councillor Phipps has covered all the points. The only one that I probably had on my list was in relation to public participation, in that the normal arrangements for public questions, statements and petitions wouldn't apply. So the suggestion is that, similar to planning, licensing and appeals, they be permitted to adopt their own protocol for public participation to reflect the way that the TAG would actually operate. Because it wouldn't necessarily be questions. If I can just explain that, it probably wouldn't be questions that are put forward, but it would be more making representations in line with the sort of arrangements we have of planning, which is not limited to the 150 words, for instance. It's a time-based arrangement. So it would be up for TAG to actually determine that.
Councillor Armstrong, you were first.
Thank you, Chair. It's a question. If for any reason that any of the ward councillors didn't agree with one of the recommendations, or anything that was coming out of this group, is there any way of being able to challenge it? It's just
Councillor Phipps.
I mean, I would have hoped that ward councillors would have engaged before it got to this point, because any traffic regulation order is advertised in advance, and often ward councillors are involved anyway before it even gets to the advertisement stage. Are advised about these. But if it got to this point, ward councillors can come and speak. Absolutely, that's what we're saying. But I would have hoped that they might have been engaged prior, really, to this point. But yes, they can come along, and if they're not happy, they can say so. So
Councillor Rampton, you indicated.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I do feel as if I've kind of slipped back 15 years to where we used to have TAG at Poole Council, and I'm not. I just seeing this as an extra layer, frankly, and I'm also thinking back to when we used to have area committees, which we probably had in Christchurch as well. I don't know if they had them in Bournemouth back in the day, but sometimes you got two men and a dog turn up, and we'd sit in a tiny little child's chair at a freezing cold school in an evening for about 3 hours, listening to people, discussing officers rather, discussing traffic regulation orders. So this is better than that. However, there's probably a bit of an underestimation of when there's a very contentious issue in a road about putting yellow lines down or something, and you're going to have a number of residents turn up and ward councillors making their presence felt, and it's just I'm just wondering why we're going back in time and doing this again. Frankly, it just seems, as I say, another layer, and I can't see that actually it's going to save Cabinet very much time or effort. Thank you.
Councillor Phipps, you can respond if you.
I'll just come in on that. We were asked to look at this actually by the administration, because all of this comes to Cabinet, and they have a whole lot on their plate, and if the public want to have their say, it was felt that a committee like this would be beneficial for the public to come and have their say there. They can still come back to Cabinet as well if they want to. Why not? But it should. You say an extra layer, but I think why not? And also, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Because quite frankly, when we had these sort of committees in Christchurch, they work very well. Just because we had them before doesn't mean we shouldn't have them again, as I see it. That's just my point of view. But we were asked by the administration, because you may get the odd one that's like that is contentious, and people are going to have their say anyway. But there'll be quite a lot of others that it will take it away from cabinet, and there will be quite easy recommendations, and the main brunt of the work will be done by TAG, and then it may make life a bit easier at cabinet and save time at cabinet. So I think that was where they were coming from, but we were asked to look at this actually by the administration. I don't know if it's possible.
Sorry, Chair, just a quick question. I'm not obsessed with SRAs, but I wondered if there was an SRA for the chair of TAG.
I don't think there will be one because it's not a formal council committee, but Mr. Jones can probably clarify.
Thank you, Chair. That would be a matter for the independent remuneration panel to consider. If the workload was high enough, there could be an SRA, but obviously a decision at this stage is not introducing an SRA. That would be a matter for the IRP and for council. And just to clarify that, the recommendations of the IRP are then presented to council for adoption. So council is the ultimate decision maker.
Okay. Councillor Chapman-Law, you indicated next.
I personally love this. I think it's brilliant. And I'd like to think that if we'd had this over the last couple of years, we could have avoided a couple of what could be argued as bad decisions.
Okay. Councillor Richard Harrier.
In my opinion, this is introducing more transparency and more democracy to our process. So it's definitely a good move.
Okay. I've just got a query. I think it's been covered with already. I'm sure Mr. Jones was saying that there are 7 formal groups on the council. So each one of those groups, from the largest to the smallest, would have a representative on this grouping of people. And in terms of the chairperson of that grouping, that person wouldn't necessarily have to be the same person at each meeting. It could potentially rotate. Can we have some clarification on, how we constitute it? Because it's not a formal committee.
There are actually 8 political groups, so there would be 8 potential members at this stage, but again, political groups can change. You could elect a chair to preside at each individual meeting, but I probably would suggest we would. My recommendation would be to elect one for the year, as well as a vice chair to step into that.
Will that be in the new constitution, that specification? If you're recommending that, is that in the draft?
There is a recommendation that says the composition of the group will be one representative from each, and they will elect someone to preside over the meeting.
It's in there. That's a recommendation. Obviously, an awful lot of changes to the constitution. Okay. Again, we've given that one a good airing. Everybody who's indicated has had their say. I think there was just that bit of sweeping up that you mentioned at the outset about licensing and appeals committee, which is in the changes to the constitution. It's not actually in the report, but it is in the constitution, which is attached to our agenda papers. And that's really, as you were emphasising earlier on, obvious that if you are requiring compulsory training for planning people who are carrying out a quasi-judicial decision, it's obvious, and we would be criticised if we didn't have it for licensing and appeals. And I think, again, it would potentially improve the decisions or speed up their meetings if the people were trained and updated regularly when legislation changed, for example.
So one thing with the recommendation, it says recommendations. The executive summary mentions that recommendations from the committee shall be referred to council, but the recommendation is just that. Do we need to actually say in the recommendation that recommends to council? There's just a thought. That's all.
I think you're looking at page 77 where we've got draft recommendation. Which paragraph, subparagraph are you talking to?
Does it say actually we're recommending this to council in the recommendation? Can't see that it.
Mr. Jones.
If I can just clarify, actually, on the subsequent page, on page 78, the table continues, and the classification of this report is for recommendation. So that indicates that's a recommendation from this committee to full council. It doesn't need to be in the recommendation.
Thank you.
And the issue around the training chairman for licensing and appeals is in the report, page paragraph 31, I believe it is, in the report, and is reflected in the changes in the constitution.
Okay, we've got a recommendation drafted and set out there. Councillor Fitz, were you prepared to propose
Yes,
that?
I'd like to propose that. Thank you.
Councillor Castle, you're on the working party as well. Would you? Yeah, you're prepared to second that? So we have got that proposed and seconded. I'm not going to read recommendations A, B, and C out, but what I should emphasise, C is basically a necessary one, allowing the monitoring officer to do any technical and formatting changes to the constitution. In other words, if it needs a minor bit of tweaking or improving of the grammar, Mr. Jones is allowed to do that. But we've got a proposal that's been seconded to recommend this to full council. As I say, we are not making the changes to the constitution tonight. There'll be a full meeting. Councillor Rampton, you want to comment?
Thank you, Chair. Can we take A, B and C separately, please?
Yes, if the proposer and seconder are happy with that, we take separate votes on A, B and C.
I'm happy to take A, B and C separately if you really want to. Yeah.
So on that basis, I will read out A. Recommendation A in relation to issue 1, planning committee structure and arrangements, the proposed arrangements to parts 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and 7, as set out in appendix 1 to this report, be approved with the implementation date of the 7th of May 2024. All those in favour, and I will be voting.
3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Okay, any against? Any abstentions? 1 abstention. Okay. Second vote will be B. In relation to issue 2, establishment of transportation advisory group, the proposed amendments to parts 2, 3 and 4 are set out in appendix 2 to this report be approved with the implementation date of the 7th of May 2024. All those in favour, I will be voting.
7.
Okay. Any against? 1 against, and that means there are no abstentions. Item C, hope this is unanimous. Any necessary and consequential technical and formatting related updates and revisions to the Constitution be made by the monitoring officer in accordance with the powers delegated. All those in favour?
6, 7, 8.
That's unanimous. Oh, sorry, my microphone wasn't on. It'll basically be this report that will be going to full council, so that'll be attached to the papers. And if you could remind us, I think it's on the 3rd of January or the 4th? 9th of January. So put that date in your diary. Thank you very much. That concludes item 7. Moving on to item 8. This is the internal audit second quarter 2023/2024 audit plan update. Those who've got a good memory will recall that this was actually presented at our last meeting, but it was deferred to this meeting because it was required that some redactions that had taken place to a document attached to the agenda, as well as the restricted agenda, needed less redaction. Mr. Nigel Stannard, you presented that before. You may not want to repeat everything that you said last time in presenting this, and indeed, it's a large report dealing with lots of financial auditing matters. But if you could refresh our memory as to what was discussed and presented last time, Mr. Stannard, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So as you correctly say, this was deferred from your last meeting, and it was the whole report that was deferred, not just the Bayside element. So with your agreement, Chair, I will just reintroduce the report, as you said. So on a general note, the delivery of the audit plan agreed by this committee is progressing well. I have no professional concerns at this stage of the year that might make me think there's a limitation of scope statement required. That, you might recall, is where either the resources in the internal audit team or elsewhere in the council result in limited audit coverage. And that in turn impacts on my ability to give a robust and evidence-based annual opinion. In the usual presentation style, and as required by the audit charter, there is a brief explanation on paragraph 5 of why the care leavers offer audit opinion was partial assurance. Paragraph 10 shows that the audit team have been busy with grant certifications during the quarter. £12.7 million worth of grants have been audited and certified in line with those grant conditions. There's also an update on the breach of financial regulations that was reported to this committee in July, and that is on paragraphs 24, 25 and 26. Councillor Phipps requested this update at that July meeting, and the update is there for you. Finally, before moving to Bayside, please note the great news at paragraph 27 that we've successfully recruited 3 young apprentices who all started in September. They are definitely exceeding our expectations in the complexity and volume of work that they've been able to undertake for us. So really good news there. So moving to Bayside and the wider pop-up report, which runs from paragraphs 11 through to 22 in the paragraph report pack. Councillors requested a different form of redaction, and the new versions of that have been circulated prior to the meeting and included in this report. And I hope the version does give you what you were missing last time around. The executive summary of my team's audit investigation is shown at Appendix 1. This summarises the key findings, and we raised 18 recommendations, and these are shown at paragraph 14 in the main report. These recommendations are constructive. They're designed to prevent something similar happening again and to learn our lessons from the venture. Any questions councillors may have on paragraphs 11 to 14 or Appendix 1, please address those to me. So paragraphs 15 and 22 then go on to explain the actions taken by the responsible service area following my audit investigation. These paragraphs have been authored by my colleague Amanda Barry, the Director of Commercial Ops, and questions from councillors on these paragraphs should be addressed to Amanda or Jess Gibbons, the Chief Operations Officer. Finally, if councillors have any questions on the exempt confidential item Appendix 2, please indicate to the Chair, who will then consider your request. I would, however, be happy to receive any questions and answer them in writing outside of the committee if people prefer. Through you, Chair, may I ask at this point if any other officers present wish to say anything before we invite councillor questions?
Yes, Mr. Jones, you did say something last time. Jess Gibbons, I think Amanda here, but I should emphasise, there are a segment of this report which is restricted, and if people are particularly wanting to examine that, question that, and go into the financial and things like that, then we will have to go below the line. Can I open it to questions initially? Is any? Oh,
I believe Mike Cox would like, Councillor Cox would like to introduce.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. Sorry, I didn't see you indicating. It's a bit difficult when you're joining remotely. Thank you. Over to you.
It's okay, don't worry. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to, I suppose, just say my piece, I suppose, like I did last time, and that is that the Bayside restaurant really was a bad concept, and it was appallingly managed, and has actually resulted in a significant new low for BCP's reputation. And the sooner we can get over this, the better, really. I am honestly as confident as I can be that since May, there has been a thorough investigation into what went wrong, and that changes have been made to ensure that this doesn't happen again. I just wanted to say that I am 100% confident that the head of audit has done a really good job on this, and I've got every confidence that his opinions are correct. I just wanted to say, though, however, that the way that what has come out of this for me anyway is that the waivers that we have in place is not fit for purpose, and we need to seriously consider how these are issued. However, I appreciate that this report is exempt from the public, and I honestly believe it shouldn't be. I believe it should be public, because as far as I'm concerned, the risk to our reputation is greater than the risk for anything else. And that's the comments I wanted to make on this report. Thank you.
Thank you for that. So are there some questions that people want to make reference, particularly Bayside, from the committee? I know we've got Councillor Eleanor Colony joining us remotely, and I was aware that she did ask some questions to Mr. Stannard previously, but it may well be that those questions which you asked direct by email you want to make public, and Mr. Stannard will do his best to give you public answers. Councillor Connolly.
Yes, thank you. So first of all, thank you very much to the officers for all the work they've done in providing us a new version of the report with different and better redactions. It's much easier to follow. So thank you for that, and for all of your work answering the many questions of us since then. So I've tried to boil it down to a few questions, but we could, there are plenty to be had on this, and I very much agree with portfolio holders' comments. This was a terrible idea, and there's a lot to unpick. But the first question I think would be really helpful for the public to hear is, it would be useful if the officers could expand on how you've got comfortable that there's been no evidence of fraud. Now, I'm not suggesting I have reason to disagree with the finding based on what I've read, but I think it's important the public understand how have you got comfortable on this and the limits on what you're able to investigate. So I think if we can cover that first, and I'll come back to my other question.
Mr. Stannard.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just going to refer to notes, if I may. The easier part of that question is on the actual operation of Bayside. So we essentially asked ourselves what was the high risk fraud areas in that operation, and we felt theft of stock, presentation of invoices, were staff actually working, etc., etc. So we have undertaken testing to rule out fraud in those areas. So formal stock control arrangements were weak, but they were not non-existent. We were able to make professional judgments based on what stock control did exist, combined with income takings, markup ratios that we understood from the business case spreadsheet that the provider provided, and the covers that were sent from the kitchen to the restaurant. And we were able to draw quite good conclusions around the invoices that were presented. Did they tally with the stock that went through the kitchen? Similarly, we were able to cross-check invoices for staffing to rota records that the service had, and again, these tallied very closely. We were also able to take information from the EPOS till and ensure that for limited cash takings that there were, you can imagine these days there's not a lot of cash takings, but those cash takings were banked into timely and accurate fashion. I would caveat, however, that internal audit can never 100% rule out fraud, but my report says we didn't find any inference of it. The more tricky question, of course, is around the declarations of interest and whether the perception of fraud in that area around the declaration of interest and then the officer being involved in the procurement, that is much more tricky for internal audit to investigate. But again, we couldn't find any evidence of fraud, and we believe from the officer's expectations and the recording of information on waivers, for example, that there was no indication of fraud or corruption in that area also.
You've
Thank
got another
you.
question. Eleanor, you've got another question.
Yeah, thank you. I'll just follow up with one other question. This is, I'd be keen on hearing others' comments as to whether they want to comment on my view of what's happened as well. So I think the key issue for me is how was it that the council was put in a position that there was so little risk to the contractor and the council would have to foot the bill for losses. So the impression I have is that there had been a steer from councillors in the cabinet to step up the beachside offer, and there was a general culture of trying to make this idea of a more upmarket restaurant happen, even if there isn't written evidence of specific operational pressure applied to officers, which I concede. So the idea involved a new mixed management model, and officers seem to have been having to make this up as they went along. Now, because of this lack of policy framework for this type of decision, there was therefore a lack of safeguards to make sure that new initiatives still stayed within the parameters of what is prudent for the council, and as a result, too much risk was taken on. So it's the way I see it is, in short, you can get away with having a work it out as you go along approach for small entrepreneurial pop-ups, but not for such big commercial enterprises like this. So my key question, bringing it all together and what we can learn from it, is to the portfolio holder and to the service area. And I think we clearly do want fresh thinking and creative ideas about the offer for tourists. But the test is how are we going to ensure that any new ideas still sticks within the limits of a prudent policy, and we don't get sort of in trouble from ideas with people with limited experience coming up with ideas and officers having to go with it. So yeah, this is my question: is how are we going to make sure that there's a prudent policy for such decisions in future?
Mr. Stannard, do you want to answer that first, and Councillor Cox may want to fill in?
I think Councillor Connolly may have indicated that it's best directed to Councillor Cox and to the service area, and I probably agree with that. Thank you.
Councillor Cox, are you there? Your picture's frozen on the screen. Can you hear us?
Yeah, I've just had to change computer.
Did you hear the question?
Can you just repeat it, Eleanor?
Sorry, yes, it's a bit of a long-winded one, really. My question is, I think a big part of the problem from this came from lack of policy framework with safeguards to make sure that any new ideas that the councillors have or officers have still stayed within the parameters of what's prudent for the council and prevent too much risk being taken on. So I think it's not a bad thing to want fresh thinking and creative ideas, albeit not this one. But my question to you is, how are you going to ensure that any new ideas that people have still stick within the limits of a prudent policy and don't take on too much risk for the council?
The officers have been instructed that should actually happen, and that there shouldn't be that kind of latitude in the future, and I have been assured that that's already been implemented. So that, rest assured that should be the case. So that policy, the new policy, effectively as you just outlined, has already been implemented as far as I'm concerned. Does that make sense?
So that means that there's a new pop-up, a policy for pop-ups, or more widely than that?
Well, certainly in terms of commercial operations, the kind of latitude that was given and the kind of deals that were made on this particular one, where they could have the profits and not sharing the losses, that is gone. That won't happen again. I think Graham probably wants to add to that. I'm sure he probably has.
Yeah, I've got Graham Farrant indicating that he wants to say something. You're joining us remotely. Good evening, Graham. Hello.
Good, Chair. Thank you. Yes, I just really wanted to reinforce the message that Councillor Cox has just given. I think what the audit report showed is that the procedures that we have in place were not being consistently followed and not being consistently applied, and therein lies the risk. So normally for an officer decision record or something like that, you would expect full liaison with legal services, with finance, in the process of preparing the officer decision record, which is the piece of paper that you sign when you make the decision. In the absence of preparing an ODR, who knows how much consultation has gone on. What Amanda Barry has done in her time in charge of commercial operations, and I'm not going to spare her blushes, but she has brought that rigour into those services to ensure that decisions like this would follow the full process as Councillor Cox has just explained. So my belief is that we have a rigorous set of approvals in place now. I think that's what Amanda and Jess have brought to the system. We have to make sure we implement that, because risk is fine. It just needs to be assessed, and you need to work out what the risk is and what the ups and downs of that are. You can do that best by doing that in consultation with colleagues in finance and legal services, and I'm much more confident now that those procedures will be followed at all times.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Crowley, do you have any other questions, or is that done?
I might come back if others have comment. I think there are plenty of questions that we could ask,
Okay,
but
okay.
let others
Well,
jump in
Okay,
now.
well, the next person I had indicated to ask questions, Councillor Phipps.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I would like to say that I do agree with Councillor Cox that this should not be an exempt item. I really think not, but there we are. So I wanted to say that at the outset. The next thing I just wanted to ask about, and to get this absolutely clear, is like the chronology of this, because of some of this, because it seems it all started off with an invoice being sent in on the 5th of May. That was the first thing that happened. So obviously talks, and you already said that talks were going on and things were, were obviously being discussed with, I don't know if there's a name of the person, but anyway, with the operator, shall we say. So that was happening. Then there was a decision taken to proceed, apparently on the 22nd of June. And then a formal purchase order was raised, and you sent us an email on this, on the 13th of July. However, the waiver wasn't actually given final approval by the head of audit and signed until the 20th of July. So that was retrospective to the order, the purchase order being raised on the 22nd of June. So when that order was made on the 22nd of June, there was no formal waiver in place until the 20th of July. So the waiver was granted after the formal purchase order was raised. So can you tell us why? Just, you may have already explained it somewhere, but I'm just trying to get it in an order, a date order here, as to why that isn't any sort of breach of whether it's financial regulations or a breach, because there was no waiver in place when orders were placed. I think that's my first question. I do have another one as well.
Okay, Mr. Stanley, do you answer that first question, please?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So yes, Councillor Phipps, you're correctly. We have circulated the answer to this. So there's only one person that authorises the waiver, and that's the service director. They authorise spend against their budget, nobody else. And that was on the 13th of July. On the same day, the order was raised after that signature was made. So my role and Jeremy Richardson's role in the waiver process is to look at the content of the waiver. And in Jeremy Richardson's case, the head of procurement is, are there any procurement issues that he wishes to flag? And my role is, are there any financial regulation issues I wish to flag? But the decision to waive is the service director's, not Jeremy Richardson's or mine.
Your second question?
Right, so we're now discussing this some 15 months after this all happened. And I just wonder why it's taken this long to get here, or to even be looked at. It just seems as though, why wasn't this sort of jumped on after by the end of August? Well, actually in August, after the first week, I think you just said, or somebody just said, that actually you realised something was seriously wrong here. But it's taken all this time, and the perception that I have, and I think a lot of people have, the public have, is that it got in the echo somewhere, and oh my goodness, we better have a look at it. That's just a perception. I'm not saying that's necessarily what happened, but I'm trying to get some idea of why we are looking at this so late in the day and trying to correct things, procedures and processes, which we've just heard are being corrected. Things are apparently changing. Mike Cox just told us that he's confident that things are changing. But we're so late in the day. Why is that? Why wasn't this looked at sooner?
It may be you, Mr. Samuel, perhaps even Amanda Barry, who wants to comment about, you know, what's, because you've joined the council, date-wise, you joined the council after this event occurred, and perhaps you could fill us in with what's happened since you've come on board, as it were.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm Amanda Barry, Director of Commercial Operations, and I've come into post since February this year. So I've been taking forward the elements following this issue being identified to change that culture and those processes. In terms of the in responding to your question around the time frame to get to where we are now, I will ask Jess to come in and respond to that element. But if I may respond to a question that I think Councillor Connolly brought up with regarding, in relation to the seafront strategy and perhaps the plan that's in place in relation to that, it connects into how we're looking at things moving forward. So we have got reference in the seafront strategy to pop-ups and that offer, but a key item that we're taking forward as part of the seafront strategy review is reviewing the pop-up provision to be able to make sure that full consideration is given, and that will link into what's been identified through the audit report and the discussions that we're having on this item currently and moving forward.
Okay, thank you for that. The next person got indicated. Oh,
sorry, I wanted to answer that. Yeah, to answer Councillor Vick's question. So, so obviously the service director was aware of the issues that were occurring. That wasn't reported up to me until the Q3 monitoring report, in terms of the financial monitoring reports, when visibility came through. As we understood that issue was emerging, I then requested the internal audit to look into why this had occurred, which is where this audit report all came from and came through. What I should say is we have a new financial system. We have a new F&O dynamic system, which means we now have much more transparency and visibility of all of our income coming in and are able to monitor it at a much quicker pace, all of that coming through. And so this season, this year, I've had much greater visibility of that financial income and impacts. So that's been a real improvement. And I really want to emphasise, Amanda came into the role in February. A big ask from me was, we need to look into this, we need to understand what's happening, we need to improve our processes and systems, and she has been doing an absolutely fantastic job of really getting a grip on this.
Thank you. Councillor, I'll call you next. Councillor Chapman, you know. So next person after that was Councillor Herrett. Then I'll call you.
I'm going to try and cover some stuff that's either in FOI or in the public report. So I'm confident that I'm not going to take us anywhere really like where we should need to go exempt. The part 4 identifies that the non-tendered spend has not been that tender has not been in the recent past. Do we know how far in the past that is, and has it been tendered since? I suppose is the big one for the airshow hospitality provision.
Who wants to pick that one up? Amanda.
Thank you. Sorry, could you point to just which part of the report you're referring to?
I think it's part 4, procurement and contract management arrangements. It states that the hospitality provision for the airshow has not been tendered in recent past. So how far ago was that, and has it been tendered since?
Thank you. I can confirm the hospitality was tendered for this year's Air Festival, and we're currently in the process of reviewing if hospitality is provided as part of the 2024 offer.
Okay, do you want to come back with that?
I suppose what was the gap for the previous tender, because it said it wasn't tendered in the recent past. So was it 2019?
Mr. Stannard?
Yeah, I would need to go and check my records, but I believe it's approximately 8 years.
Okay. Perhaps you could check that and come back to the committee. Yes,
Sorry, Chair, may I also make an important extra remark on the Councillor Connolly's fraud question, because I was a bit remiss of me to miss something quite crucial.
Okay.
At the end of that, our internal process, we shared the information with the police, both our report and some of our data behind, to determine whether the police felt there was anything of fraud that we were missing, and they concurred with our view that there wasn't anything obvious from the, so they basically concurred with our view.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
I got one of the independent members indicating, Lindy, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. To add on to the question of the fraud, there's only reference made to the stock controls and then the declaration of interests. So the stock in the amount of the expenditure of 331 is only 25% of the cost. So what about the income? What procedures were performed on income and the completeness of the income, and then on the quotations and tender process followed? What procedures with regard specifically to cover fraud was performed? Then on a email it was stated that 20,000 pounds can be made per day without any difficulty. So it was in operation for 29 days. That equates to income of 580,000 pounds. So the total expenditure of 331 gives us a profit of 249. So I wanted to know what is the real reason of the deficit. Is it not enough covers and seats, or what was the issue? Because initially it was stated that the 20,000 could be made per day with 150 seats. And then it doesn't completely tie up to a later statement of 170 covers that would result in a 58,000 loss and 260, etc. So it doesn't completely tie up. Then another question, there's not really mention of not the fraud procedures, but the audit procedures that's been done on the expenditure and on the income. There's a little bit of a difference, but there's no mention of what, maybe if there was a report or it could be shared, especially the fraud and then the audit of the expenditure and the income. Then my next question would be, I just wondered about the delegation of authority, if that is
Yes, I don't know who wants to respond to this, because
okay.
They're quite detailed questions, and some of them may be drifting into financial matters, which, we said at the outset we wouldn't be debating or raising. But Mr. Stanley, can you help on this? Because obviously we've got stuff above the line, and obviously there's documents below the line.
Yeah, I think I can give some sort of general answers. I may, ask Jess or Amanda to come in and help. But addressing the fraud around the income first of all. So the key testing we did there was what went out of the kitchen in terms of covers, and did the income match the covers that were going out. So what we knew the pricing menu from the menu and the price of the menu, and therefore what was going out of the kitchen, we could tell what the aggregate income should have been according to the menu prices. So that's how we tallied with what was going out of the kitchen. Did it equate to what we expect in income terms from the menu pricing? And that tallied very closely. In terms of the overall numbers, my view is that there was very significant optimism bias in the financial modelling. The actual financial modelling was accurate, actually. It's very accurate. But the scenario that was felt that was likely to be the outcome was significantly skewed. So there's huge optimism bias. You know, Lindy's mentioned some cover numbers, and the cover numbers were nowhere near the expectations in that modelling. So that's the, in my view, the biggest issue here, that we were just completely wrong on the covers that the restaurant was going to churn out on a daily basis.
Yes, I did see somewhere that there was various scenarios put forward, you know, scenario A, B, and C, and it was suggesting that the takeaway business would increase at the same proportion that the sit-down meals would increase. Why that would come about, Councillor Rich Herriot would know, because he by his profession would know about takeaway and sit down meals. And one of the other things I picked up was that the contract, which I'm pleased to hear that very new type procedures are now in place, was on the basis that the contractor would get a share of the profits, but not share in any losses, which, okay, you could put into a contract, but you know, that's very generous. But you know, that shouldn't happen again. Or if something like that is going to happen again, we need to limit the amount of share of profit. Rich, I mentioned your name, so do you want to sort of fill in the blanks on what I've said about the business plan that existed here?
Well, I suppose it's quite concerning that we allowed a third-party operator to tell us how viable their contract would be. And that's certainly the impression I've got, in that, you know, they got to say, we'll make X amount of money if we go ahead, and you need to pay us this to do that. And there didn't seem to be much challenge back. Mixed management suggests that we had some involvement as a council in managing it, and I think it's become apparent that there wasn't much management on a day-to-day basis of the operation. I suppose it's quite concerning that there weren't much in the way of steps taken to mitigate the losses during the operation. I have seen a P&L. It was subject to an FOI request, so it is in the public domain already. And that suggests that the staff were not dropped as quickly as they possibly should have been through weeks, kind of probably 2, 3, and 4. I suppose, is there any comment on that?
Yeah. Amanda?
Thank you, Chair. I'll try and recall the items that have been raised, so please do tell me if I miss anything. In relation to the mitigation sort of during the operation, once the difference between expectations and actuals have been identified, our council staff did work with the operator to, as has been mentioned already, look at what mitigations could be put in, such as reducing the amount of perishable food that was purchased in line with the throughput through the restaurant, also making changes to some of the entertainment that was being proposed, and also making sure that the staffing levels were reduced as required to support the customer base. Sorry, would you mind reminding me of the other items?
We allowed a third-party operator to basically tell us how viable they were going to be. I suppose is the biggest question that I started with.
Thank you. And that is one of, I wasn't involved with it at that stage. So in terms of, absolutely, that is not something that we've delivered in this year, and we will not be taking forward. There will be a mixture of making sure we've got longer time to consider all options, and that we will not be taking that level of risk going forward. A big element of what's been identified of this process was how the contract was let, and that includes how it was developed in those initial stages.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Chapman-Law, you had a question or a comment?
Yeah, thank you for the confidence that this will never be allowed to happen again. That's greatly appreciated. I do have one comment. Sorry, excuse me. I think in a previous audit report in the not too distant past, there was a comment over the administration having too much of a say in the day-to-day running of the council in certain circumstances. And with that in mind, and we will never know the answer to this, I completely understand. Yeah, the councillors involved no longer in the council, and neither is the officer. And I really struggle to believe that those people weren't involved in this from a very early stage.
It was more of a statement than a question.
Really a statement.
So, Councillor Armstrong, you're a statement or a question?
No, it's more of a comment really. And also it's to say that I too believe that this should be exempt. I think given you know, how important it is for the members of the public, our residents, to have that confidence within us, I think it's important to get information out there. I think a lot of what my concerns looking at this report have already been aired, but it seems to me that the biggest one was about not having the business case right from the beginning, and like you're saying, Jamie, about another party, a third party actually advising on the modelling. I've not heard of anything like that. I mean, I've trained as a project and a programme lead actually within Bournemouth Council. So reading this report, I've never read a lesson learned log quite like it actually. So I'm really encouraged to hear that we won't be allowing this to happen again. And I truly do hope that we have learned lessons. I think I just want to pick up a little bit more perhaps on what you're saying, Councillor Chapman, about the impact of political pressure. And I just wonder, we will never know the full extent of that. But I think, yeah, going forward, I think we need to put this behind us. I mean, ultimately, this was a piece of delivery that lasted 4 weeks, and we're actually now, I know it's important to drill down and to look at the issues, but there are other aspects of our audit report that we also need to be considering. Final thing I would like to say is I have worked closely with the events team in the past. I've run a number of charity and fundraising events down at the prom, and I found them to be extremely professional and efficient in terms of contractual sign-off, managing of risk, having to prove insurance, and in fact going through quite a process with them before you can even make your booking of the space. So I just want to acknowledge the events team as well. Thanks.
Okay, Councillor Rampton, you indicated.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And I do agree with previous speakers that this should have been aired in public. You know, why not? But I just think there's a real danger here that members of this committee are perhaps straying into matters which aren't the remit of A&G, the more operational issues. And I also think there's a danger of not recognising that it quite clearly says in the report that there was no correspondence between the portfolio holder and there was no undue influence that's been identified. I just think, don't turn this into a witch hunt. You know, the officer concerned, quite clearly it says there's no misconduct, the allegations are unsubstantiated, and there was no warranted disciplinary action taken. Okay, it was a mixed management model. It didn't work, clearly it didn't work. And public money was lost, and that's not a good thing ever. But just don't turn it into a witch hunt on any officer or portfolio holder, and you know, just don't turn it into another Conservative administration bashing, which happens so often in these committees. I mean, and a question, please, Chair. Did anybody on this committee at any time, no, don't sigh, Councillor, I'm entitled to have my say, and I kept quiet while you were having yours. Yeah, I did actually. Did anyone at any time suggest that the previous portfolio holder would come in and answer questions or have a join in the discussion about this, because I'm absolutely sure that they would be very happy to do so. So if that didn't happen, why didn't it happen? Got all these questions. Why didn't you ask the relevant people?
It's a good question. I'll have to ask Mr. Stannard as to whether he or his colleague who actually did the investigation did that or was required to do that. Bearing in mind that, well, the investigation started after the elections or before the elections in terms of investigation and talking to people.
The investigation started during the election period, where I forget the correct terminology. Richard might be able to help.
Oh, there's a herder, yeah.
Yeah, pre-election period, and so that was but fundamentally, based on the evidence that we gathered, I did not feel it necessary to speak to the portfolio holder, because I felt the information we had was sufficient for me to draw conclusions as stated in the report.
Okay, you have the answer, Councillor Rampton. Okay.
The question was really whether the committee felt that that was warranted. It sounds as if Mr. Stannard made that decision, but did anybody at the committee at any time think?
I suppose until we got the less redacted report several days ago when the agenda papers were published, I don't think we as a committee could formulate any conclusions on anything really properly. Okay, I think just about everybody. Oh, Councillor Phipps.
Just say this only came to committee in October, and here we are now back in November. It's come back again, so we haven't really had the opportunity to call anybody to look at it. No, we haven't. But I don't think we should go political on it. Absolutely, this committee is supposed to be, as far as I'm aware, politically neutral, and we're supposed to look at things in a rational way, which I hope is what we're doing. And clearly, there were issues here, and I think we are quite rightly questioning what happens, and that's how I see it. So, thanks.
Councillor Colley, you got a comment or question?
Yeah, just a follow-up comment is just to say it's not too political to say that there was clear evidence that there was a steer from previous portfolio holders for a high-end dining cuisine experience that was a step up on previous years, and that was the context. I think that is relevant. So that's why it's really important that there's a strong policy in place specific to how we make these beachfront offer and tourist decisions, so that whenever there is a political pressure from a cabinet, as there should be, to push the boat out and come up with new ideas, there needs to be a really strong framework for how we think about those and make those decisions. So to follow up to Councillor Cox's comments, I'm glad that there are now policies in place to stop there being the same lack of sharing losses in contracts, but I think we need to be really specific and think how we think about that seafront offer and pop-up decisions going forward. Make sure there's a framework for that.
Thank you for that. Mr. Sana, you circulated. Oh, Sam, you're out on Linda. Sorry, I didn't see your hand indicated.
That's my apologies. I'm not sitting in this chair again. I've missed out a few times. Just a couple of things here. I'd like to reassure the councillor that there are now 2 independent members on this committee, and part of our role as independent members will to make sure that nobody takes political judgment on anything that happens in this committee wherever possible. Having looked at the review and the recommendations, which I found very thorough, I would like some reassurance on how those recommendations are going to be taken forward, and we will be able to see that they are implemented. I very much appreciate hearing that this will not happen again, but I want to know how it won't happen again, please.
Yes, Amanda Berry, and also linking in with that, I think the lessons aren't just to be dealing with beachside catering. I think it could go across the whole council, be it Hinton, Chewton Bunny, Upton, edges of Upton, Hanworthy. Every service directorate of the council should learn from this in terms of procedures and record keeping. And Amanda, can you fill in on this? Are the lessons going to be dissipated council-wide?
Thank you, Chair. So in answer to the initial question around how the recommendations are being taken forward, excuse me, I have got regular, initially bi-weekly, now monthly meetings with the heads of service and other staff in all of the areas that sit within commercial operations to review these audit recommendations and also other audit recommendations that are there to make sure that there is focus, understanding and progress on all of those elements that have been raised, and also to do that cross awareness to make sure that lessons and recommendations are embedded into all of commercial operations, not just within the relevant service that the audit has been undertaken in. We have target dates for all the recommendations, but we are looking to, we have already instigated a number of those already ahead of the target dates. Some of them will take a little longer to finalise than others, mainly linked to the seafront strategy and the review of the pop-ups, because that is being taken to Cabinet a little bit later, perhaps, than had originally been anticipated when the audit recommendations were written. But I can reassure you that regular meetings are taking place.
Just Gibbons.
Oh, sorry. I just wanted, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to give a sort of more corporate view on that as well, just to reassure that the Corporate Management Board, which is chaired by Graham, we see any audit actions that aren't going through or aren't on target, and those are closely monitored. And I do the same at my directorate level through the Directorate Management Board for the whole of operations. So that's on a monthly basis at a performance team of the I can't speak, department. I'm really cold. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Rich Herod.
Wasn't it consideration given to clawback against the contract, given that there was some kind of failings against it? Sorry, I've got the contract that was also part of that FOI request that I got sent. So I'm just kind of like, yeah, was any consideration given to clawing back money from the contract?
Probably the contract didn't allow for it. You know, the question is, was there any clawback in the contract that went wrong?
Thank you, Chair. I would have to take that away and look at the contract in detail to understand if there was an element in the contract that allowed for that. That's something that I can't say I'm overly familiar with right at this moment.
Okay, perhaps you email the council direct on that. Okay, well, we've given this a good airing again. We have on the agenda papers for this item, internal audit, a recommendation that's been set out for us. And I'll just read it. It's recommended Audit and Governance Committee note progress made and issues arising on the delivery of the 2023-24 internal audit plan, and B, note the explanations provided in Appendix 3 and determine in the case of high priority recommendations not implemented by the initially agreed target date if further explanation and assurance from the service stroke corporate directors required. So I need somebody to propose the acceptance of this report, somebody to second it. So Councillor Chapman is proposing and Councillor Herrick is seconding it. And I think we should take a formal vote on that. So all those in favour of accepting this report, please indicate.
2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
And that's everybody voting for it, nobody abstaining or wishing to vote against, so that's unanimous. So that is the last item on our agenda, correct me if I'm wrong, and therefore, just check the time, 2023, that brings the end to this committee meeting. As I said earlier, our next meeting is in January, so those watching online, I'll see you next year. Thank you for watching.